How do I configure STelnet login to a NetEngine series router? There are two scenarios for logging in to a NetEngine series router through STelnet: first-time login and non-first-time login. Let's first have a look at first-time logins. After powering on a device for the first time, you can log into it through the management network interface via STelnet or through the console port. For details on how to log into the device through the console port, see the video How Do I Log Into a NetEngine Series Router Through the Console Port. STelnet uses SSH connections to provide secure telnet services. SSH provides encryption and authentication to protect devices against attacks, such as IP address spoofing. By default, you can log into a device directly through the management network interface. For some NetEngine series devices, you can only use the console port for login after powering on them for the first time. If a device is connected to a DHCP server before startup, the default address of the management network interface may be overwritten or lost. To ensure security, change the username and password immediately after configuring services on a device. The IP address of the management network interface can be changed or deleted, and the interface can be shut down as needed. To achieve successful login, perform the following operations. First, start putty.exe. The putty configuration dialog box is displayed. In the host name or IP address text box, enter the IP address of the SSH server. Then, click Open. If the connection is normal, the system prompts you to enter a username and password. You need to enter the default username and password of the device. For details, see the corresponding customized and default usernames and passwords file. If the device starts with factory configurations and the DEF-CFG file does not contain a preset account, the first-time login process is triggered during STelnet login. In this case, the system prompts you to create a user and set a password. After the user is created, the connection is torn down. You need to log in to the device as the new user. Next, let's look at non-first-time login. If the IP address of a device is known and the device has been logged into before, you can log into it through Telnet or STelnet to remotely configure other devices on the network. By default, users cannot directly log in to some models of NetEngine series routers through STelnet. Before logging into a device through STelnet, log into it locally through the console port and complete the following configurations. When the configurations are complete, you can log in to the SSH server through STelnet. In this example, a NetEngine series router functions as an SSH server, and a PC functions as an SSH client to log in to the SSH server. The first step is to use the console port to log in to the SSH server and configure an IP address for the management network interface of the server. Before performing this step, you can run the display IP interface brief command to check whether an IP address has been configured for the management network interface of the device. If so, skip this step. The second step is to configure a user level and authentication mode for the specified VTY user interface of the SSH server. To configure a user level for the VTY user interface, enter the VTY user interface view. Run the user privilege level command to set a user level, and then commit the configuration. To configure an authentication mode for the VTY user interface, run the authentication mode AAA command in the VTY user interface view to set the user authentication mode to AAA. Run the protocol inbound SSH command to configure the VTY user interface to support only SSH. Then, return to the system view, enter the AA view. Run the local user password command to configure a local username and password. Run the local user service type SSH command to set the access type of the local user to SSH. Run the local user group command to add the local user to the specified user group, and commit the configuration. If the VTY user interface supports SSH, you need to set the authentication mode to AAA. For the AAA authentication mode, you need to specify an access type for the local user. The third step is to create an SSH user and configure an authentication mode for it. SSH users support multiple authentication modes. If the authentication mode of an SSH user is RSA, DSA, SM2, or ECC, a local RSA, DSA, SM2, or ECC key pair needs to be generated on both the server and client. In addition, the public key of the client needs to be configured and edited on the server. The public key can then be assigned to the local user. This example uses the RSA authentication mode. Specifically, run the SSH user command in the system view to create an SSH user. Run the SSH user authentication type RSA command to configure the RSA authentication mode for the SSH user, and then commit the configuration. To ensure security, do not use an insecure algorithm for SSH user authentication. You are advised to use a secure authentication algorithm. For details, see the corresponding product documentation. The fourth step is to create a key pair on the SSH client based on the authentication mode configured for the SSH user, and copy the generated public key to the SSH server. This example uses the puttygen.exe software. The detailed operations are as follows. First, enter the Windows command prompt window. Then, enter puttygen and click Generate to generate a key pair. During the key pair generation process, constantly move the mouse cursor within the window while avoiding the green progress bar. Otherwise, the progress bar and key pair generation will stop. Finally, when the key pair is generated, enter the password in the key passphrase text box and enter the password again in the confirm passphrase text box. This password is used to log in to the SSH server. Click Save Private Key, enter private as the name of the private key file, and click Save. Copy the generated public key to the notepad and name the notepad file public.txt. The fifth step is to edit the public key on the SSH server, and assign the key to the user. The details are as follows. Enter the RSA public key view and set the RSA encoding type to Open SSH. Then, run the public key code begin command to enter the public key editing view. Copy the public key generated in the previous step from the public.txt file to this view, and edit the public key. After performing these operations, run the public key code end and peer public key end commands in sequence to exit the public key editing view and public key view, respectively. Finally, run the SSH user assign RSA key command to assign the RSA public key to the SSH user and commit the configuration. The sixth step is to enable STelnet on the SSH server and set the service type of the SSH user to STelnet. The details are as follows. Run the STelnet server enable command to enable the STelnet server function. Run the SSH server source command to specify the source interface of the SSH server as the management network interface. Run the SSH user service type command to set the service type of the SSH user to STelnet, and then commit the configuration. Finally, to improve system security and prevent unauthorized users from logging in to the SSH server, you can configure an ACL rule on the SSH server for access by the SSH client. The details are as follows. Enter the basic ACL view, create an ACL rule, run the SSH server ACL command to allow the SSH client to access the SSH server, and commit the configuration. When the configurations are complete, you can log in to the SSH server through STelnet. To achieve successful login, perform the following operations. First, start putty.exe. The putty configuration dialog box is displayed. For security, you are advised to use putty 0.58 or later. In the host name or IP address text box, enter the IP address of the SSH server. Second, choose connection, SSH, from the category navigation pane of the SSH client. In the protocol options area, set SSH protocol version to 2. Third, choose Auth under SSH in the navigation pane, click Browse, and import the stored private key file named private.ppk. Finally, click Open. If the connection is normal, the system prompts you to enter a username and password. You are now logged in to the SSH server.